Acts chapter 27. It was decided that we would sail for Italy. Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a Roman commander named Julius. He belonged to the Imperial Guard. We boarded a ship from Adramyttium. It was about to sail for ports along the coast of Asia Minor. We headed out to the sea. Aristarchus was with us. He was a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day, we landed at Sidon. There, Julius was kind to Paul. He let Paul visit his friends so they could give him what he needed. From there, we headed out to sea again. We passed the commerce side of Cyprus because the winds were against us. We sailed across the open sea off the coast of Sicily and Pamphylia. Then we landed at Myr in Lycia. There, the commander found a ship from Alexandria sailing for Italy. He put us on board. We moved along slowly for many days. We had trouble getting to Sindus. The wind did not let us stay on course, so we passed the commerce side of Crete, opposite Salmone. It was not easy to sail along the coast. Then we came to a place called Fair Havens. It was near the town of Lasea. A lot of time had passed. Sailing had already become dangerous. By now, it was after the Day of Atonement, a day of fasting. So Paul gave them a warning. "Men," he said, "I can see that our trip is going to be dangerous. The ship and everything in it will be lost. Our own lives will be in danger also." But the commander didn't listen to what Paul said. Instead, he followed the advice of the pilot and the ship's owner. The harbor wasn't a good place for ships to stay during winter, so most of the people decided we should sail on. They hoped we would reach Phoenix. They wanted to spend the winter there. Phoenix was a harbor in Crete. It faced both southwest and northwest. A gentle south wind began to blow. The ship's crew thought they saw their chance to live safely, so they pulled up the anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before very long, a wind blew down from the island. It had the force of a hurricane. It was called the northeaster. The ship was caught by the storm. We could not keep it sailing into the wind, so we gave up and were driven along by the wind. We passed the commerce side of the small island called Cauda. We almost lost the lifeboat that was tied to the side of the ship. So the men lifted the lifeboat on board. Then they tied ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. They were afraid it would get stuck on the sandbars of Citis. So they lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. We took a very bad beating from the storm. The next day, the crew began to throw the ship's contents overboard. On the third day, they even threw the ship's tools and supplies overboard with their own hands. The sun and stars didn't appear for many days. The storm was terrible, so we gave up all hope of being saved. The men had not eaten for a long time. Paul stood in front of them. "Man," he said, "you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have avoided this harm and loss. Now I beg you to be brave. Not one of you will die. Only the ship will be destroyed. I belong to God and serve Him." Last night, his angel stood beside me. The angel said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must go on trial in front of Caesar. God has shown His grace by sparing the lives of all the sailing with you. Man, continue to be brave. I'm facing God. It will happen just as He told me, but we must run the ship onto the beach of some island." On the 14th night, the wind was still pushing us across the Adriatic Sea. About midnight, the sailors had a feeling that they were approaching land. They measured how deep the water was. They found that it was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they measured the water again. This time it was 90 feet deep. They were afraid we would crash against the rocks, so they dropped 4 anchors from the back of the ship. They prayed that daylight would come. The sailors wanted to escape from the ship, so they let the lifeboat down into the sea. They pretended they were going to lower some anchors from the front of the ship. But Paul spoke to the commander and the soldiers. "These men must stay with the ship." He said, "If they don't, you can't be saved." So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat, then let it drift away. Just before downpour tried to get them all to eat, for the last 14 days, he said, "You have wondered what would happen. You have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I'm asking you to eat some food. You need it to live. Not one of you will lose a single hair from your head." After Paul said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God. He did this where they all could see him. Then he broke it and began to eat. All of them were filled with hope, so they ate some food. There were 276 of us on board. They ate as much as they wanted. They needed to make the ship lighter, so they threw the rest of the grain into the sea. When daylight came, they saw a bay with a sandy beach. They didn't recognize the place, but they decided to run the ship onto the beach if they could, so they cut the anchors loose and left them in the sea. At the same time, they untied the ropes that held the rudders. They lifted the sail at the front of the ship to the wind. Then they headed for the beach, but the ship hit a sandbar, so the front of it got stuck and wouldn't move. The back of the ship was broken to the pieces by the pounding of the waves. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners. They wanted to keep them from swimming away and escaping. But the commander wanted to save Paul's life, so he kept the soldiers from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and swim to land. The rest was supposed to get there on boards or other pieces of the ship. That is how everyone reached the land safely. Acts chapter 28. When we were safe on shore, we found out that the island was called Malta. The people of the island were unusually kind. It was raining and cold, so they built a fire and welcomed all of us. Paul gathered some sticks and put them on a fire. A poisonous snake was driven out by the heat. It fastened itself on Paul's hand. The people of the island saw the snake hanging from his hand. They said to one another, "This man must be a murderer. He escaped from the sea, but the female god Justice won't let him live." Paul shook the snake off into the fire. He was not harmed. The people expected him to swell up. They thought he would suddenly fall dead. They waited for a long time, but they didn't see anything unusual happen to him. So they changed their minds. They said he was a god. Publius owned the property nearby. He was the chief officer on the island. He welcomed us to his home. For 3 days, he took care of us. He treated us with kindness. His father was sick in bed. The man suffered from fever and dysentery. So Paul went in to see him. Paul prayed for him. He placed his hands on him and healed him. Then the rest of the sick people on the island came. They too were healed. The people of the island honored us in many ways. When we were ready to sail, they gave us the supplies we needed. After 3 months, we headed out to sea. We sailed in a ship from Alexandria that had stayed at the island during the winter. On the front of the ship, the figures of the twin gods were carved. Their names were Castor and Pollux. We landed at Syracuse and stayed there for 3 days. From there, we sailed to Rhegium. The next day, the south wind came up. After that, we reached Puteoli. Then we found some believers. They invited us to spend a week with them. At last, we came to Rome. The believers there had heard we were coming. They traveled as far as the Forum of Appius and 3 taverns to meet us. When Paul saw these people, he thanked God for them and was encouraged by them. When we got to Rome, Paul was allowed to live by himself, but a soldier guarded him. 3 days later, Paul called a meeting of the local Jewish leaders. When they came, Paul spoke to them. He said, "My brothers, I have done nothing against our people. I have also done nothing against what our people of long ago practiced. But I was arrested in Jerusalem. I was handed over to the Romans. They questioned me, and they wanted to let me go. They saw I wasn't guilty of any crime worthy of death, but the Jews objected, so I had to make an appeal to Caesar. I certainly did not mean to bring any charge against my own people. I share Israel's hope. That is why I'm held with this chain, so I have asked to see you and talk with you," they replied. "We have not received any letters from Judea about you. None of our people here from Judea has reported or said anything bad about you. but we wanted to hear what your ideas are. We know that people everywhere are talking against those who believe as you do. They decided to meet Paul on a certain day. At that time, even more people came to the place where he was staying. From morning until evening, he told them about God's kingdom. Using the laws of Moses and the prophets, he tried to get them to believe in Jesus. So some believed what he said and others did not. They didn't agree with one another. They began to leave after Paul had made a final statement. He said, "The Holy Spirit was right when he spoke to your people long ago. Through Isaiah the prophet, the Spirit said, 'Go to your people, said to them, you will hear but never understand. You will see but never know what you are singing. These people's hearts have become stubborn. They can barely hear with their ears. They have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes. They might hear with their ears. They might understand with their hearts. They might turn, and then I would heal them.' Here is what I want you to know. God has sent his salvation to the Gentiles, and they will listen." For 2 whole years, Paul stayed there in a house he rented. He welcomed all who came to see him. He preached boldly about God's kingdom. He told the people about the Lord Jesus Christ, and no one could keep him from teaching and preaching about these things.